am calling because I wanted to know, for an elderly person, say in their 80s or 90s, who's not having any serious health issues, but they're expressing an interest in assisted suicide.
This is the Best of the Week on Relevant Radio.
Today on the show, we talk about the end of life. Our spiritual director today is Father Dave Heney. Father Dave is a priest for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He holds a degree in marriage, family, and child counseling, is a published author, and currently serves as the pastor of St. Bruno Catholic Church in Whittier, California. Welcome back, Father, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm glad to join you on this really meaningful and very important topic.
So grateful for your wisdom on this, Father, and helping us to suss out some of these complicated, what can be complicated issues. Intentional ending of life, or what we might know as assisted suicide or euthanasia or something like that. Can you talk a bit about that and why that's not in line with the Catholic teaching?
Boy, it is really outside of Catholic teaching.
Yeah.
I've done, funerals for suicide victims many times over my 47 years in the priesthood.
Wow.
And, the church understands that because the desire to live, the self-preservation, the desire to live is so strong that if someone does commit suicide, that's almost proof positive that the person was overcome with an overwhelming wave of depression or despair, just being inconsolable. And so that's why we are allowed to do funerals for people who commit suicide, because we know that often with a note that they might leave, or just knowing their situation, we recognize that they were just overpowered by a wave of emotions that just overcame them. Unfortunately, assisted suicide, in order for the doctor to not be accused of murder, several doctors have to verify beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person is not overwhelmed, is perfectly sane and calm and cool and rational, and making a very conscious, fully deliberate decision to end their own life. That is almost word for word the definition of a mortal sin.
Yeah.
And that's why we can't do a funeral for someone who has assisted suicide, physician-assisted suicide, because that person has deliberately chosen with full awareness to end their own life. Now, why do we say this? Well, you didn't cause yourself to be born. You didn't make yourself be born. You didn't create yourself. You simply discovered yourself alive, probably around the age of 2 or 3 or so. Sometimes people not do it to their 20s. But you simply discovered yourself alive. Then you do something good with the life that you had. And so since we didn't cause ourselves to be born, we can't cause ourselves to die. Our life literally comes from someone else. It's someone else's idea. And it's God's idea. So we have to pay attention to him. It's not something that we can take on our own and do with as we will. We can't. We're not allowed to harm ourselves. We can't torture ourselves. We can't be our own worst enemy. And we cannot kill ourselves at the end of our life. So assisted suicide is incredibly tragic. Unfortunately, not every family is beautiful and loving. So we do have some families that put pressure on Aunt Mary and say, Aunt Mary, we need the house, we need the car, we need your estate. Why are you staying alive? I mean, that kind of thing happens. It's very tragic. So assisted suicide is an incredible tragedy. It has no business in American life or anywhere. It is deeply offensive to God. And just by definition, it is, just as the Catechism defines, it is clearly a mortal sin. We just cannot countenance. It's just tragic that some governments, state and local governments or whatever, are making provisions for it to happen. It's just very tragic, and it can have no part in a Catholic life.
Yeah, that makes sense. But let me just jump on and be a bit of a devil's advocate here for a moment, Father, because one of the arguments that's used often when it comes to assisted suicide is in the case of suffering, and perhaps it's rather profound suffering on behalf of someone who's a loved one, who's elderly and wishes that the suffering would just come to an end, and is saying that they're ready to die. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm advocating for assisted suicide, but this is an argument that we will hear and we might even face someday in our lives. So how do we deal with something like that?
So I've heard that argument believe me, many times.
Sure.
I actually did some research on this a little while ago, and it turns out that because people have to verify that they are of sound mind and body when they make arrangements for assisted suicide, part of that, it turns out that the vast majority of cases are those cases where a person feels like they are a burden to the family, financial burden. So it's not over pain and suffering. It's often over finances, really estate planning issues. But just to be fair, just to address that issue of pain and suffering, there is, in this day and age, especially in this country, in the 21st century, there is no excuse for any person in medical care to not have very, very powerful, effective pain management. The advances in pain management have been extraordinary in the last decades or so. So I'm telling you, if you are in pain or, really difficult situations, get a second opinion, because it may be that your doctor just doesn't know. And that's happens. Doctors can't know every single thing. They can know a lot about this, but not about that. So get a second opinion. Just a quick search, Google search will provide tons of different, very, very up-to-date modern methods of pain management, whether it's targeted drugs, electrical stimulations. I just think people don't do enough research, or they don't seek these second and third opinions, because obviously people don't like to be in pain. They don't like to suffer. And
Right.
so there's a tremendous amount of medical research going on to alleviate that. And they've been very successful. So make use of that. There is just no reason why you have to have this kind of life in pain and suffering. And it's not a matter of being drugged up or in a daze. There's very, very targeted, very specific pain alleviations that are very effective. I think once people find out about them and they use them, they'll recognize that the reasons for assisted suicide kind of melt away. I mean, we are lucky that we live in the 21st century in the United States, where we have access to the highest level of medical activity in the history of mankind. Make use of it. Find out what's going on. But you should not feel a victim, or you should not feel like there's nothing else I can do. You should definitely not feel like you are talked into it by family. But I can tell you, just in terms of this argument, people in favor of assisted suicide will always go to that story of pain and suffering. When it turns out that most people who are choosing assisted suicide are doing it for estate planning reasons.
Fascinating. It's a good clarification, Father. And maybe just one more clarification, too, since you brought up pain management and that sort of thing. Maybe draw out the distinction for us between administering medications that may reduce a person's, cognitive function or awareness in managing pain versus the intentionality of administering perhaps even those same medications to end one's life.
Well, I mean, you actually put your finger on exactly the right word. What are the intentions?
Okay.
Intentions are everything. So, let's say we have a pain medication. The classic one they use is morphine. There's many, many others, but morphine is the one that's kind of in common parlance.
Right.
So you can give morphine to a person to alleviate pain. You can also give a lot of morphine that will end up killing the person.
Right.
So it's the same medicine, right? You're giving doses of morphine to this patient, your loved one. But what's your intention? Are you increasing the level of morphine because you want to increase the pain alleviation? Or are you increasing the morphine because you want Aunt Mary to die? So your intentions are everything, even though the actual physical act of administering morphine is the same. What's going on in your mind changes everything.
Yeah.
So intentions are everything. If you're giving whatever procedure you're doing to alleviate pain, that's your motive, you can keep on doing it, even if it's increasing.
Right.
So it really can depend. It all depends on your intentions. Are you hoping to help the person or hurt the person?
Carrie is calling in from California. Carrie, welcome.
Good morning. I am calling because I wanted to know, for an elderly person, say in their 80s or 90s, who's not having any serious health issues, but they're experiencing, the usual things, and, those kinds of complications. And they may be experiencing a little depression or otherwise just tired from life and expressing an interest in assisted suicide. Catholic, but maybe not as deeply rooted in their faith to be able to sustain them during this time. What advice or resources could you offer to families who want to support their loved ones during these times?
It's a great question, Carrie, and I think I can help with some ideas. First of all, someone in their 80s and 90s, are going to experience, no surprise here, that their body is no longer their friend. That, aches and pains, difficulties, just basically just a general diminution of their physical ability. Well, if most of their life they've been able to do things, then that stands out in their mind much more higher. Their whole life becomes, I can't do this anymore. I can't do that anymore. I don't like the fact that I can't do this anymore. So I think going forward, a really good Catholic response is to kind of open our eyes. It's the truth that sets us free. That beautiful line from John chapter 8, verse 32, the truth sets us free. So what's the truth? The truth is your body is no longer able to do things. So the faster that we accept that, the better. But then there's other parts of our life that are not lessened. So because someone who's in their 80s and 90s has been around, has seen a lot of things, has learned a lot of things, has accrued a lot of wisdom. And so the later part of their life is not going to be involved in physical activity. It's not going to be taking hikes and walks and camping in the countryside. Maybe it's going to be about sharing wisdom, writing letters to their grandkids, sharing advice, talking to friends. In other words, use the part of yourself that is still active and still good, and accept the fact that the part of your life that is no longer active and good, like your body, is a natural course. It's a natural event, but don't look to it anymore because it's not there like it was when you were younger. So I guess my advice is at any stage of your life, look at your life at what's going well and healthy and use that to some good effect. That we take that from the words of the consecration. This is my body, this is my blood given for your happiness. Jesus took his entire self and dedicated to our happiness. So what is it that you have now that's still working that you can use for some good? It's not going to be your body. It's not going to be your ability to run or, to lift weights. It's going to be your mind. It's going to be your attitude. It's going to be your virtues. So even if you're homebound, even if you're bedbound, even if you are in a hospital, you're not dead yet. And so you can still use the things that you have in your life that are working and use them for some good. So I would say to anyone, no matter what age they are, what do you have that you can offer to make some good in the world today? And that's what you do. Hope that helps, Carrie.
Yeah, Carrie, thank you so much for the call. Wise words from our spiritual director today, Father Dave Heney, as we're talking about end-of-life issues. Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.